Hi grade 11s, and welcome to today's Maths Literacy Show. I'm Hayley and I'm going to be taking you through the show. So I hope that you're all ready and excited, because today we're going to be doing something that's really important. 1, to your syllabus, and 2, to life lessons. I'm going to be teaching you all about life today. So what are we actually doing? We're going to be dealing with banking and inflation. So these are really, really important things that you're going to take out of today's lesson. So I hope that you remember these one day when you open up your bank account and when you run your businesses and when you kind of live your life, because these are life lessons. So let's see what we're going to do. First of all, our key focus for today is going to be to identify the different types of bank accounts that you have and kind of being able to have an educated decision as to when you're opening up a bank account, which bank account is best for you. You know, it's no good to just accept what you're being told. You need to question things, and hopefully we're teaching you this so that one day you have the best bank account for you. Then we're going to go on to perform calculations involving simple and compound interest, again life lessons, and finally we will define and calculate the effects of inflation. So I hope that you all ready, have got papers out, pens, all the rest of it, and that you are ready and focused. So, best thing to do is start off with the types of bank accounts. So we get a couple of different accounts. The first one we're going to look at is the transactional account. These are certain accounts are useful for everyday transactions, such as buying groceries or paying your cell phone bills. These accounts, such as a current or a check account or even a debit account, we call them transactional accounts. These are accounts that you're going to want to open, where you're going to want somebody to put your salary into, and everything that you deal with on a day-to-day basis will come out of this transactional account. Then even within the transactional accounts, you've got decisions to make. Different banks offer you different kind of bonuses and different things, so you need to make an educated decision. Don't just accept, and don't just go to the same bank as your parents or your uncle or anything else. Make these decisions yourself. So the next thing we have is a savings account. Our savings account is also crucial and important. You want to be able to save money. So these savings accounts that you can put money into whenever you have money available. So hopefully every month you are able to save money. It is actually really important. They say that the first person you should pay out of your salary is pay yourself. Start a savings account, and I promise you, you will never look back. So savings account are special type of accounts that they basically take the money out of your transactional accounts, because believe me, if it's there, it's easy to spend. So you put it into a special savings account. You can get a fixed deposit account, which basically the banks will say, well, okay, you need to deposit a certain amount of money in order to have this account. And maybe you need to deposit a certain amount every month. These all depend on which bank you're going at. And there's also these put away a certain amount of money every month. You also get what they call like a 32-day account, where you put money into it and you cannot touch it for 32 days. So it's all important to understand, but please listen to me now. Open up a savings account. Really, really important. Okay, next account that we have is a credit account. And this type of account works with a credit card. So you use it, that is the credit card, to pay for things and that you need to pay. Then at the end of the day, you need to pay the amount that you've spent back to the lender, usually the bank when it's a credit card. So you pay up front, and at the end of the month, you need to pay them back for what you have spent. The interest penalties on this account are really, really high. So you need to make sure that you can pay back the full amount that you owe on time. Otherwise, you end up paying way more interest than you need to. So with a credit card, you actually need to be very disciplined. And if you don't have that kind of discipline, then don't have a credit card. It's very easy to get into trouble with a credit card. The other thing I just wanted to bring up for a second is I want to bring up an overdraft. I can't spell today, so let's try that again. Okay, let's delete that. An overdraft account. Now this could be your transactional account, and this is a facility that the bank gives you, kind of like this loan. So you might have an overdraft of, say, 10,000 Rand. That will mean that the bank gives you an extra 10,000 Rand over and above what's in your bank account that you can use. You're using their money. You're basically borrowing the money from them. So if certain months you need to go into overdraft, you will be in a negative value, so you will owe the bank money, and other months hopefully you don't need to go into the overdraft and you have a positive value. Now you've got money in the account. It is a nice facility to have, so that if you do have those unexpected expenses and your savings you're not using, that you can still pay for these unexpected. Like all of a sudden the car needs to be fixed, you can go into your overdraft and take the money out of there. Best thing to do right now, though, is let's go do some examples. So we're going to start with this example, and we are dealing with, okay, so question 1, we're dealing with Sipho. He has just started his first job. He currently does not have a bank account, and he wants to open one now that he will be earning a salary. Sipho lives in an area where the shops do accept cards, and he has access to the internet. Based on Sipho's salary, he qualifies for the following 2 options at his bank. So option 1 is the green account. This includes a set monthly fee. This fee allows you 5 free transactions per month. Any transactions over this limit will be charged at pay as you transact fee. The green account is structured as follows. And now it's important whenever we are given information like this to actually make sense of the table that we are being given, or the graph, or the picture, whatever it is. So we are looking at the green account, and coincidentally I'm using green pen. So we've got a monthly fee of 95 Rand, and this includes ATM withdrawals. We've got 5 free. Electronic transactions, unlimited. Now those electronic transactions include debit orders, stop orders, electronic payments, debit check purchases, is all included. So let's just underline that. That's all included there. ATM cash deposits, we get 2 free, and internet banking subscription is included. Now remember, he had internet, so this is important for him. But having internet banking is really important because you can check your account whenever you've got internet. There's no checkbook, a debit check card or for worldwide payments, and access to overdraft and personal loan facilities. So he does have access. And because of his salary, he qualifies for those things. Right, option 2 is the gold account. So now let's change it to yellow. So we've got the gold account, does not have a set monthly fee, although there are monthly costs involved. Each transaction is charged for as follows. So on our gold account, we've got no set fee, but pay as you transact fee for deposits. You've got check deposits of 11 Rand, and then cash deposits at the ATM and at the branch. There's 2 different amounts. And I'm going to discuss this with you in a lot more detail when I actually do the questions. So we'll come back to that. We've got cash withdrawals at the bank, that bank's ATM, at another ATM, at the branch, the difference. We've got stop payments, stop or debit orders, electronic account payments, that's if you pay via the internet, and check or debit card purchases, and monthly charges. There's a monthly service fee on arranged overdraft. So if you have an overdraft, you're paying 23 Rand. A monthly service fee on unauthorized overdraft is 58 Rand. That's basically an unauthorized overdraft is if you go into the negative, like you're kind of down to your last 1,000 Rand and you need to spend 1,200. Your bank might actually honor that 1,200 Rand and put you into overdraft for just a little bit, that's 200 Rand extra. Now that is an unauthorized overdraft. They haven't said to you, we will give you an overdraft, but they have said to you, you know what, we're not going to stop the payment going through, but then they charge you for that facility. There's a minimum monthly service fee, a monthly management fee, and internet banking subscription fee of 22 Rand. So these are all the fees that are over and above, although they say there is no set fee. There's no set fee because there's a whole lot of other fees. Right, let's see what our questions ask. So firstly, starting with our green account, SEPA wants to calculate what his monthly bank fees would be for each account, including any transactions. How much would he pay in fees each month if he chose the green account? So if we had no transactions, what would he actually pay? Well, he's paying our set fee of 95 Rand. So that was an easy question, 95 Rand. SEPA does not want to draw too much money at a time, as it's risky to carry a large amount of money around. Now, we all know this. We live in South Africa, we have to remember that. So we kind of want to avoid using cash. In fact, I can go for weeks without actually having any cash in my purse. I try to keep like a few coins because I need those for like the security guards and parking. Right, he plans to do shopping once a week and he will swipe his card. How much will he pay for these transactions if he opens a green account? So first of all, we need to work out how many transactions is he going to have. Now it says once a week. Now this is something that I want to point out at this over here, is once a week, so we've got 1 times a week. How many weeks in a month? Well, we are going to assume it's a 4-week month. Assume 4 weeks in the month. Because if we're not told otherwise, I always assume 4. And it's a good idea for you to actually write that information if you're making any assumptions like that, because then your examiner knows exactly what you're doing. And we're not really testing to know if you know how many weeks are in the month. So we're testing further than that. So we need to know that they're 4. So we're actually going to have 4 times transactions. He needs to pay for his groceries. So we're going to kind of assume that he's paying 1,000 Rand a week for groceries. Going back to this account, we are swiping the card. So we are going to be having a debit or check card purchase. It comes under our electronic transactions and it gets unlimited, which means that this is 4 times, it's free. So he pays 0 Rand or nothing, or anywhere that you want to tell me that he doesn't pay for this. He estimates that he will need to draw 200 Rand at least 5 times a month. How much would it cost him to make these withdrawals each month if he chose the green account? So we are looking at 200 Rand that he is withdrawing, and he's going to do this 5 times. And we're going to go back to our account and see that we are withdrawing, let's just delete that, it's not in the way, an ATM withdrawal, and we see that he gets 5 for free. So because he's withdrawing 5, we're basically saying that that is also free. But let's quickly discuss what happens if he withdraws that 200 Rand for a 6th time. So because the question said at least 5, so I want to acknowledge that I understand the question and I know I'm paying from number 6. So for the 6th transaction, that's what I want to look at. How much does he pay for this one? Well, it is 200 Rand that he is withdrawing. And we're going to go back up here and we're going to see that for anything over and above that, in fact, if we went to the original question, I'm going to go back a page. It says that option 1, any transaction over this will be charged a pay-as-you-transact fee. So we're looking at this pay-as-you-transact fee, and that account, pay-as-you-transact fee, is actually in our gold account. So we are looking at a cash withdrawal at an ATM. So that's withdrawal. At the bank's ATM, he's paying this amount here. 3.95 Rand plus 1.15% of the value. So let's go back and write that in. He's paying 3.95 Rand plus 1.15% of the value. Now, how much is he withdrawing? He's withdrawing 200 Rand. Now, on my calculators, I'm going to do this. Now, guys, if you have got a normal 4-function calculator, please remember your BODMAS rules. So you're going to have to calculate the, let's go back to this, BODMAS rules, you're going to have to calculate, need a pen, we're going to have to calculate that first. Now, if you're using a scientific calculator, which I highly recommend, and I can't really say that because you are allowed to use the 4-function calculator, but if you're using the scientific calculator, then you know your calculator can do this all at once. But if not, you need to do it first. So let's see, we've got R3.95 plus 1.15% of the amount that he's withdrawn, so 200 Rand. So he is paying R6.25 for that. So that's what he would pay for every subsequent withdrawal that he makes. And these are important information. These are your key lessons, your life lessons. You must know that every time you go to an ATM, it can cost you money. So you've got to think about this very carefully. Right, let's see what else Sipho wants to do. He plans to pay his rent and medical aid contributions via the internet. His rent is 1,500 Rand per month and his medical aid costs him 550 per month. How much would it cost him to make these payments each month if he chose the green account? So going back to the information that we had for the green account, if we've got electronic transfer, those include debit orders, electronic payments. There we're looking at our electronic payment. That is unlimited. So again, what is he paying here? He is paying, it is free, as he has unlimited number of electronic payments. Sounds like a really good account, this one. Are there anything Sipho can do to reduce the cost of banking for this option? Well, in actual fact, if we have a look at his banking, he's paying 95 Rand, and then pretty much he's not paying for his shopping once a week. He's paying very little. If he keeps it under 5, then he's not paying for that either. And his rent and his electronic transfers are free. So is there anything that he can do to reduce his account? Is possibly just keep the withdrawals, the ATM withdrawals, to 5 or under. And in that case, he will pay a total, so let's just put our total in here, he will pay a total of 95 Rand. So it seems like a really good account, this one. Paying 95 Rand, but remember he needs to keep his account low. Let's check out our gold account. So, right, his monthly bank fee would be for each account, excluding any transactions. How much would he pay in fees each month if he chose the gold account? Well, with the gold account, he had no set fee. So his monthly fee, there was no set monthly fee. So how much is he going to pay without the transactions? He is going to be basically paying 0 Rand or nothing, or it's free. You can write any one of those words. He does not want to draw too much money at a time, as it's risky. So he goes on his shopping once a week and he will swipe his card. How much will he pay for these transactions on the gold account? So again, we said it's 4 times shopping, and we have to calculate each one. Each transaction needs to be calculated on its own, and then we're going to times it by 4. So we've got 4 transactions, and I actually want to just add an amount of 1,000 Rand per week. So I think that's more or less realistic for how much he would spend on groceries. So we now need to find how much is this going to cost. So we are doing a check or debit card purchase. That's what we're dealing with, and it is R3.65 Rand plus 0.70% of the value. So let's write that out. So it was R3.65 Rand plus 0.70% of the value. And I'm going to make that 1,000 Rand. I just want to double check that I had the right number. Perfect. Now let's work that out for each one. So on my calculator again, remember your BODMAS, so it's important. So we got 3.65 plus 0.70%. That's not a percent. Check your calculators very carefully as you type in your numbers. It is so important that what you're typing is what you're meant to type, because I have had the strangest answers, and then my kids say to me, but it says so on my calculator. And I always say to them, well, did you check what you typed into the calculator? So it's really important that we practice on the calculator, we know how to use them, and we check. So 0.70% of, and we said it's 1,000 Rand. Right, so he's going to pay 10 Rand 65 per transaction. So 10 Rand 65, need my pen again. And we're going to do this 4 times because we have our 4 transactions there. So on my calculator, I'm going to times by 4. Get an answer of 42 Rand 60. Now remember, it's money, so that 42,6, it's money. We have to have a decimal place, 2 decimal places for money. So don't forget your 0 at the end, and don't forget that we've always got a reference. And in this particular lesson, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with money. So everything has to have that Rand sign, because these are really easy marks to kind of lose. I don't want you to lose any of those easy marks. So that's what he is paying for his shopping. He estimates that he needs to draw 200 Rand at least 5 times a month. How much would it cost him to make these withdrawals each month if he chose the gold account? So we are going to look at each one on its own, so looking at 200 Rand, and then afterwards we will times it by 5 times. So his withdrawal, and we're assuming he's going to withdraw it at his bank, and that's at 3 Rand 95 plus 1.15% of the value. So let's write that out. So it was 3 Rand 95 plus 1.15% of the value. In fact, we had done that calculation in this question before, but let's just do it again. It was 3.95 plus 1.15% of the value of 200, and that was 6 Rand 25. And he's doing that 5 times, so we're going to times it by 5, and it's 31 Rand 25. So, perfect. Now we can move on to the next part of the question. Okay, so Sipa wants to pay his rent. Now I've got to pick in here. He wants to pay his rent and his medical aid contributions via the internet. His rent is 1,500 Rand per month, and his medical aid costs him 550 per month. How much would it cost him to make these payments if he chose the gold account? So we need to look at each one. We're going to look at our 1,500 Rand. What does that say? And then we're going to look at our 550. So let's go find out what the rate is that he's paying for electronic payments. So electronic account payments, I'm going to change color here. Electronic account payments is there, and he's paying 4 Rand plus 0.75% of the value. So let's write that in. So we're paying 4 Rand plus 0.75% of the value. And in this case, it's 1,500. And for this one, we're going to pay 4 Rand plus the 0.75% of 550. So remember, each one of these actually gets its own. Every time we do a transaction in this account, we are charged something. Now let's get our calculator out, and we got 4 Rand. Now we don't need those 2 zeros. We could have just written it as 4 plus 0.75% of the 1,500, okay, and that's 15 Rand 25. So let's write that in. 15 Rand 25. Okay, and then to calculate the 550, I can go back to my calculator and actually just delete my last number. And 550, I'm paying 8 Rand 13. Remember, it's money, 2 decimal places, so 8 Rand 13. and let's work out the total. So I'm going to put the total here. Is just adding these two together. So we had our R8.13 plus, what was that other amount? 15.25. And in total we're paying 23 Rand 38. £23.38. So that's for every transaction. Right. Are there things people can do to reduce the cost of banking for this options? Now, there are definitely plenty of things that he can do to reduce the cost. He basically needs to reduce his number of transactions. Because remember, every time he does a transaction, he is being charged. So he can reduce the number of transactions. Then if you remember correctly, well, let's go up a little bit. For this internet, this electronic payment, his base that he was paying was 4 Rand. Whereas for the account payment, he was paying 3.65 Rand. So maybe he needs to find a place where he can go pay his account not via EFT, because he'll pay a little bit less per transaction. So there are ways that he can reduce his transactions. But again, this is something that when you have a bank account, you need to be able to pay an account electronically. So sometimes you don't necessarily, you can't avoid, should I say, you can't avoid paying the bank charges. But to reduce them, maybe you can. He can definitely reduce the number of transactions, reduce the number of withdrawals that he makes. Maybe he must go shopping twice a week. It's not twice a week, twice a month. So there are ways. Basically, reduce the number of transactions. I would actually have a look at the mark allocation for this type of question. It is your opinion. You can't really get it wrong, which is really nice. But give more information rather than less. Let's see what the next part of the question says. The next question says, calculate the total SEPA will pay in bank charges per month for each account. Right, well, let's go back to our green account. In our green account, we actually worked out his total was 95 Rand. So let's go back and write that in. For our green account, let's use a green pen. The green account, the total was 95 Rand. And that was because he was very wise in the way that he had done these transactions. For the gold account, how much does he pay? Well, let's go back to our gold account, and we're going to have to add these all up. So firstly, he pays, let's clear that. He pays nothing for the transaction fees. He pays 42.60 Rand there. Then he pays 31.25 Rand. Check that you're entering the correct amount. Then 23.38 Rand. And was there anything else? No, there was only those three things. So let's delete my last question. And what does he pay? He pays 97.23 Rand. 97.23 Rand is what he pays. Which account would work out the cheapest for SEPA? Well, now we have to go with the kind of thing. At the moment, for the information that I have on the board, the green account is better. But that is assuming that everything stays exactly the way it is, that he doesn't make one more withdrawal, or that he doesn't deposit any cash into the bank, or he doesn't go into the bank to use the teller. So I think it's very hard on kind of like 1 month of information to decide which account is best. And maybe you need to like track your information that you have, and then you can decide on which bank account is best for you. It's important to remember that every time you use your card, you are being charged. Every time you use the bank, you are being charged for this transaction. So I think that we need to move on to interest. Okay, so interest. As a consumer, interest can work in your favor or against you. Now, this really depends on your situation. So if you are borrowing money and you need to pay it back, you're going to pay it back with interest, this really does work against you. But if you are saving money, like I said at the beginning of the show, you need to save money. If you are saving money, then that interest that you earn is definitely in your favor. So we've got two kind of parts of the same coin, but you want to pay little interest if you borrow money and earn a lot if you're investing. So that really does depend on whether you're paying interest on borrowed money or earning interest on saving. Now we've got two types of interest that we deal with. The first is simple interest, and the second one is compound interest. I'm going to go through each one of these in a little bit of detail. So when it comes to simple interest, it is a percentage of the original amount, whether you borrowed or you invested. It is based on the original amount. This set amount is then added each time interest is added. And simple interest is usually worked on a yearly basis. So basically, if we start off with an amount, so let's start off with an amount of, say, 5,000 Rand. And let's deal with it at an interest rate of maybe 9.8%. So how much interest are you going to earn or pay on this 5,000 Rand is basically we take our 5,000 Rand and we times it by 9.8%, which we're going to do on our calculators. So 5,000 Rand times by 9.8%, and we get an amount of 490 Rand. So every month we are going to be earning or paying 490 Rand. So at the end of first year of 1 year, you're basically going to have in the bank account this 5,000 Rand plus this 490. So you're actually going to have 5,490 Rand. At the end of the second year, now remember the interest doesn't change. It is simple and it is worked out on that original amount. So it was still our 5,000 Rand, although in the bank at the moment we have 5,490 Rand. But our interest doesn't change. It's 490 Rand. Let's get a calculator to do that one. 5490 plus 490. So every year, 5980. Every year, 5980. Every subsequent year, all you're going to do is adding 490 Rand to this amount. I could basically take my calculator out and I could say, well, okay, at the end of year 3, I get another 490. And at the end of year 4, I'm going to have another 490. And I could carry on doing this kind of indefinitely. But the amount of interest doesn't change. That's why we call it simple. It doesn't change. It's based on the original that we had, that first amount of money. If you are borrowing money, this is what you would like to pay back. If you are saving money, then honestly you would like compound interest. So let's go through and explain compound interest. So compound interest is different because the amount added each time depends not only on the original amount, but also on the amount of interest already added. In fact, you are earning interest on interest. So if I could try to draw a quick picture of this, let's try to draw a picture of each one of these. So if I had an amount of money, and with my simple interest, all that happens is every month I get added that same amount. With my compound interest, what happens is I start off with an amount of money and then stuff gets added. And then we now base our calculation on this full amount and it gets added. So your interest that gets added on the original and on the interest. So let's go do that calculation again. So if we had our 5,000 Rand at 9.8%, and we're going to compound this once a year. Annually, and that is once a year. So we're starting off, we're going to have 5,000 Rand and we're going to increase it by 9.8%. And I like to increase by multiplying by 109.8%. So whenever I increase by percentage, I always say 100 plus the percentage that I'm increasing it by. So let's get my calculator out. My 5,000 times by 109.8%. And I should end up with the same answer, 5490. So I've got the same answer as my simple interest. All I had was 490 Rand, but that's because I haven't had interest before. It's in year 2, in my second year, that now I have this 5490, and now to that I'm adding 109.8%. So I'm not only earning that 9.8% on my 5,000, but on the entire amount that I have in the bank. So that calculation, I have that number, let's times by 109.8%. And I can see now that it starts increasing, 6,028.02. So that is 6028, sorry, 6028, that's right, .02. And now that's going to increase even more. So let's try the third year. So now I'm taking my 6028.02 and increasing that by 109.8%. And to that times by 109.8%. And I said 6618.77. 6618.77. Just double checking that that's what I had, 6618.77. And that's what you get after 3 years. Now, in reality, there is a formula that you can use for this, but we don't teach you the formula in grade 11. We expect you to understand what we're actually doing, and we should really only ask you up to 3 years to calculate. And quite clearly, we can see the difference between simple and compound interest. I think what the best thing to do right now is let's go do an example, so that, in fact, before we do an example, I think it's important that we take a bit of a break. Let's go stretch for a bit, and then we come back, we do an example on this interest rates. So enjoy your break, but hurry back. Welcome back from your break. I hope that you managed to stretch and maybe get something to eat, and all this talk about money is making me quite hungry. So I hope that you are ready to face the rest of it. Now, interest, just explain simple and compound interest. Best thing to do is actually do an example. So let's look at the example we have here. So this is question 2, and now we're dealing with Lucky, and he wants to invest 10,000 Rand, and he has 2 options. So his first option is the Action Saver account, which gives him 5% per annum compounded quarterly. And the second option is Safe Saver, which is 6% per annum simple interest. It's really important to understand the difference between the two to make a decision as to which account is best for him. So Lucky decides to invest in a Safe Saver for 3 years. How much interest will he have earned after 3 years? Show all your calculations. Well, what we're going to do in this case is we're going to take his original that he had, and that was the original of 10,000 Rand, because we want to work out what interest he's going to earn every year. So he's working at 6% per annum, so we're timesing that by 6%, and on our calculator, we're going to do that. So it was 10,000, and make sure that you type into your calculator correctly. Check that you've got the correct numbers. I always tend to count them in my head. I go 10 and then 3 zeros. Okay, times that by 6%, and we'll see that he earns 600 Rand per year. So it is 600 Rand per year. Now, the interest is only calculated on the original amount. So every year he's going to earn 600 Rand. So all we need to do in this case is we actually take our 600 Rand and we times it by 3 years. So we can do that on our calculator. I think we can also probably do that in our head, and we see that it is 1,800 Rand. So he earns 1,800 Rand. go back and check the question. They want you to know how much interest he will have earned. So we have given them the interest portion only. And the next question says, how much will he have in his account in total after 3 years? Well, in total, what does he have in his account? And I'm actually going to show you a formula right now because it might be something that it might be worth remembering. We've got a formula. It's A equals to P plus I. A is what we have in the bank account. This is our final value. So I'm going to write this out. A is the final value, the final amount. P is your principal, or what you started with. So the start value. And I is the interest. This is something you don't necessarily need to have the formula, because in actual fact, what has he got in his account? He's got what he started with, what he put into the account, plus all the interest that he had. But I could type it into this formula. So he had, our principal was 10,000 Rand, and our interest was 1,800. And in total, we now can add our 10,000 to that, and we see that he had 11,800. So that's what he had in total in his bank account. Right, let's move on to the next part of the question. So Lucky still wants to invest his 10,000 Rand, and he still has his 2 options. So what have we got? Lucky decides to invest in the Action Saver for 3 years. He draws up a table below to help him calculate the interest earned and the total at the end of the 3 years. Now, the reason that Lucky's drawn up a table is because this money that he invested was compounded on a quarterly basis. So before we carry on, let's actually discuss what that means. So if we look at our Action Saver, it was 5% per annum, but compounded quarterly. Now remember your interest, your compound interest. Your interest is calculated on your balance in your account plus interest. So it all depends on how often it's compounded, on when they calculate that interest. So we've got a couple of options when it comes to compounding. And let me write it up here. So we can have it, so let's call this compound periods. We'll call it compound periods. And we've got a few choices. So the first one is annual. That basically means one time a year, once a year. Now in my example that I gave you, that was compounded annually. So they work out the interest, what's in your account, calculate interest, add it. And then for a year, nothing happens. At the end of that year, what's in your account, add the interest and add it. So it's compounded yearly. But we can have shorter periods of compounded. So what we've got in this question is quarterly. And that basically means it's 4 times a year. So kind of every 3 months. You know, if I take my 12 months in a year, divide it by 4, every 3 months they are calculating what's in my bank account and they are adding it. They're adding the interest. 3 months later, what's left in the account, calculate the interest, add it. 3 months after that, etc., etc. But your interest rate, so we were talking about 5% per annum, that we need to change. I'm going to come back to that, so just remember that thought. Quarterly, then very often, and mostly we deal with monthly, and that is one that they calculate at the end of every month or the first of every month, how much is in your account, interest, add it, so it's 12 times in a year. And finally, hardly ever happens, but you might see it daily, which would be 365 times in the year. It kind of like every evening, what's in the account, add the interest, and compounded. Now what's important to note is they are not adding the full amount. So we are dealing in this case with 5% per annum, but it is compounded quarterly. So what happens is we take our 5% and we actually divide it by 4. And that is the amount of interest that is calculated in that quarter. So we are not getting 5% every quarter, but we are getting 5% for the year. It's an annual amount, but it's just compounded more regularly. And it actually has a huge effect because you're earning interest on interest. So let's do some calculation. Well, let's look at the calculations that Lucky did. So first thing that Lucky did is he said, well, he started on January 13th with 10,000 Rand in the bank account. Then our first quarter, he's worked out the interest at 125 Rand. So how did he get that 125 Rand? Let's just do this calculation quickly. He took his amount that was in the bank account, so that was our 10,000 Rand, and he times it by the 5% divided by 4. Now, you can do this in a number of ways. You can work out the 5% and then divide it by 4. You can use a fraction. I'm going to use a fraction because I have a fraction button. So we've got 10,000 Rand times by 5%, and that 5% needs to be divided by 4. And that's where he gets 125 Rand. So that was the 125 Rand. And then that 125 gets added to his account. 3 months later, what happens in quarter 2? We work out the 5% on that divided by 4. And you see that it's 126.56. And every quarter, that amount of money is actually increasing, and we're getting a different balance in the account. So now let's see what kind of calculations we got. On what date will the first installment of interest be paid? Now, this is a nice question, on what date? So we've already discussed that we are getting interest every quarter, and a quarter of a year is 3 months. So we are going to say, well, it's actually 3 months later, 3 months after he started. So we've got January, we can do February, March, and April. So we could say, well, exactly, if we worked it out exactly, it would be in April, and maybe they charge it at the beginning, maybe it's in the middle of the month. So let's say the 15th of April. So not the 15th of April, it'll be April, sorry, not the 15th, it'll be April 1st. I'm going to go the 15th. So he starts off in January, so it's there till April 1st. And that's when they'll choose. Or possibly the 31st of March. So you could have done that. So it's 3 months after he started. Calculate the balance at the beginning of the last quarter. So this is the one which we've left out of the table. We want our balance here. Now, if we go backwards, what did we have? At the end of the day, we ended up with 11,607 Rand and 55 cents. He's calculated the last interest that he's actually earning in that last quarter. So if I minus the 2, I'm going to end up with that value there. So I'm taking my 11, see if I can write this here. That's my 11,607,55 minus the interest, which has now gone up to 143 Rand 30. And I get a total 11607.55. Check the calculator, always check that you are typing in what you want to be typing in. And I see that it's 11,464.25. 11,464.25. So calculate the balance at the beginning of the last quarter. Well, that is the balance at the beginning of the last quarter. How much interest is earned in the third quarter of 2015? So now let's go back to our table, and what do we know? We know we've just calculated our last quarter, and that was 11,464.25. So let's add that in, 11,464.25. Okay, we're looking for this amount here, how much interest was earned. So the best way to do it actually is probably to go back to what we know. So let's go to January 15, and we had our total there. And maybe we can work through the 2 quarters and then finally the last quarter and see what that interest is. So I think it's easier than working backwards. Now, my instinct was to actually minus these 2 values, but those are a few quarters that are in there because we've only got 1 quarter there. So let's go to January. We had 11,044.86. So I'm going to write that in, 11,044.86, and I'm going to work out what the interest rate on that is. So I'm going to say, well, okay, it was 5% divided by 4, and work that out. 11,044.86 times by, and let's use my fraction, 5%, the percentage button, divide by 4. And I see it's 138 Rand 06. and then I'm going to add it. So this was now quarter 2. Was that quarter 1? Let's just go through. That was quarter 1. Quarter 1. Now quarter 2, we're going to add these two. So plus 11044.86, and I get 11182.92. 111, can't remember that number, 82.92. Again, times by the 5%, and I'm going to do this actually as timesing it. Let's see if we can do this in one step. Times that by 105% and divided by 4. Okay, but that didn't work, so let's just go back. 11182.92 times by your 5% over 4. Again, I'm 139.78, and then carry on doing this, or let's quickly do this. 79, 139.79, 139.79, and finally add that. That's 1132271. Oops, 11. Can't remember the number. 32271. And finally, this is what we're actually looking for. So times that by my 5% over 4, and I get 141 Rand 53. So at this point, we're going to have 141 Rand 53. Does it make sense? I'm looking for a number that's kind of less than 143, but higher than 136, so I think it does make sense. I know it's taken a little bit of time, but we've got our perfect answer, so there you go, one way of calculating. Calculate the total amount of interest earned over the 3-year period. Well, the total amount of interest earned, if you remember correctly, I gave you, well, what was in our bank account was our principal plus interest. Now, we know what's in our bank account. So we know that we've got 11,607.55. 11,607.55. We know that was 10,000 Rand that he started with plus the interest. So I can take what's in my bank account and just minus that original that I had. So let's take that. So it's 11,607.55 minus my 10,000 that I started with, and see that it is 1,607 Rand 55. So what's in my bank account is actually this 1,607.55. Now, which savings account would you choose? Now, if you remember correctly, what we had before is in our simple interest account, we had 1,180, sorry. Just trying to remember what we had. We had 1,800 was what we had. In the compound account, what we've just calculated is that we had 1,607.55. So the question is, which is actually better? And at the moment, it looks like our simple interest is better because we are earning more interest. But if you go back to our calculations, you will see that our simple interest was 6% and our compound interest was 5%. So this simple interest was because it was 6% compared to that 5%. But now the thing is that if we leave this for a little bit longer than 3 years, we're going to end up with our compound interest being much better. So it's very hard to compare two different accounts when you've got two different kind of interest rates. And you need to decide, well, how long are you actually going to invest this money in? So in Lucky's case, he was investing for 3 years. Which is better for him? Definitely the simple interest, because it was a higher interest rate. So compound interest, yes, he would earn more if it was the same interest rate. So our question is, which savings account would you choose? And if it was only 3 years, if I was exactly like Lucky and I had that 10,000 Rand, which would I choose? I would choose the simple one. And what was that simple account called? It was called the Safe Saver. Safe Saver, so we would choose a simple, and it is the Safe Saver. So it's always important to actually read the question carefully, because as I said to you in the beginning, if you are actually saving money, you want compound. But then it also does depend on the interest rate. So if you can get a higher interest rate, even though it's simple interest, it is still to your benefit. So those are all things that you need to work through. Right, let's move on to some inflation and learn about inflation. So we have inflation. It is a way to measure how the purchasing power of money changes over time. What do we mean is how much do things cost you? So how much money do you need to do your weekly shop and to fill up your car with petrol and possibly go to the doctor and all the rest of that? Inflation represents the average increase in the prices of various goods or services over time. The prices of all goods and services do not increase by the same amount over a certain period of time. They kind of increase at different amounts. So you might go in today and buy bread, and next week you'll realize, well, the bread is a little bit more expensive. But we're talking about over a period of time. And what we actually look at usually is we look at a basket of goods. So those goods will include fruit and vegetables and your meat and bread and all your staple diets. And then we also look at a basket of services. So going to the doctor and going to the optometrist and how much electricity costs and all these things. And we end up with an average. And inflation we work out as an average per period. So, and we normally work out at inflation over a year, but we also have inflations in certain months. So we might have an inflation in January, February, like every month we can look at the inflation, and we will look at an average for the entire year. And normally in these calculations that you see in exams and tests, we're looking at inflation from one year to the next. What is important to note about these calculations is that you need to break down your calculations by year, because we're dealing with an average over that period. So you can't go an inflation from 2008 to 2010 and just do one calculation. You're actually going to have to look at every year going along the way. But I'll tell you what, best thing to do is let's look at an example. So our example we have is the average inflation rates for the period of 2006 to 2010 are shown in the table. So what do we have in the table? This is our average rate of inflation. 2006 it was 5%. In 2007, 6.5%. In 2008, 11.3%. So you can see that changes. Now those are averages. So the cost of a litre of milk in 2006 was R4.45, and the cost of a litre of cold drink was R5.90. Now the question says, use the average inflation rates to complete the table. Right, so we are working out 2007, and this is where I said we need to break it down bit by bit. So let's do milk first. And we are paying R4.45, and it is increased by 6.5%. So I'm going to say times by 106.5% to get me my final value. So in my calculator, I'm going to say 4.45 times by 106.5%, and I get R4.74. So we're going to round that off, it's R4.74. So let's write that in here, R4.74. Now to take that milk, I'm now dealing with my R4.74. I actually should have added my years, so that was 07. And let's change the color here to just add, that was 07, and now we're dealing with 08. So R4.74, and what was our interest rate there? It was 11.3%, so we're timesing by 111.3%. So take my answer, and I'm going to round that off, so 4.74 times by 111.3%. And I see it's R5.28. 8. Don't forget 2 decimal places. It's money. Always need 2 decimal places. And don't forget to round correctly. So 5,28. So my answer, R5.28. And this is what I mean by actually splitting it up and doing year by year. You cannot just go from 2006 to 2008 and only increase it by 11.3%. You need to do the steps in between. Let's do our cold drink. Let's change color for that. So we'll do our cold drink. And again, 07 was R5.99 times by 106. Let's try that again, 106.5%. So on my calculator, 5.99 times 106.5%. It's R6.38. And I can fill that into my table. And then finally in 08, we now take our R6.38 and we times that by 111.3%, because it was 11.3% increase. So my calculator, 6.38 times by 111.3%, and we get an answer of R7.10. Don't forget money, 2 decimal places. R7.10. Perfect. Have we answered the question? It says use the average inflation rate to complete the table. So we have done that. So remember, year by year. That's what we need to do. By how much did milk increase between 2007 and 2008? Well, clearly we take our 2008 value of R7.10 and we're going to minus our 2007 value, which was R6.38. And we can get the amount that it increased by. So on my calculator, I'm going to do that. R7.10 minus R6.38. And check your calculator. R7.10 minus R6.38. And we see that it increased by 72 cents. So important to answer the question as they ask it. Now, one of the nice things that they like to ask when they come to these kind of questions, and I'm just going to do it here, is they like to ask you for the percentage change. They actually ask you to calculate that average percentage. So what we would do, and I'm just going to show you an example. Let's change colors totally. So if, for example, we know that bread in 2010, and I'm really making these numbers up, in 2000, okay, try that again. Bread in 2010 cost us R7.85. And bread in 2011 cost maybe R8.45. We can then use that to calculate the percentage change that we had from one year to the next and effectively work out this average percentage increase, kind of the inflation just on the bread. So how would we do that? Is what we would do is we would take our formula, and they would probably give you the formula, but just in case, let me explain it to you. We are taking the change, so we're going to say, well, okay, it was R8.45 is my higher amount, minus what I originally paid, and this is an increase on the original. So I take my original amount there and I want it as a percentage. So I times by 100 to get it as a percentage. So on my calculator, well, I can use the fraction button. So I have a scientific calculator, but if you don't, you'll work this out first, and then you would press equals, then you would divide it by the original, and finally press equals and times by 100. And we can see that it's 7.64%. So this increased by 7.64%. So this might be a question that they ask you. Now, I like to tell my kids to learn this formula. If you understand the formula, maybe you don't need to learn it, but what I tell my kids to do, it is actually really easy. You say the new number minus the old number divided by the old number, because we're looking at the change over the original, and times by 100 because we want it as a percentage. So it's a really nice formula for you that you can actually learn. Let's see what next part of the question is. During which year was the rate of inflation the highest? So then we go to our rates of inflation and we see that they went up steadily, and 2008 was the highest. So it was in 2008. Now, in 2009, the rate of inflation was 7.6%. Does this mean that things were cheaper in 2009 compared to 2008? Now, this is a really, really important question, and it's one that mostly people get wrong. So what we are seeing, let me show you what we are seeing. We are seeing that in 2008, the inflation was 11.3%. In 2009, the inflation was 7.6%. So our inflation rate went down. But remember, we are working out year by year. So what happens if I had to go back to my milk? What was the cost of milk? I just want to write that last number in, 5.28. So if I take my 5 Rand 28 and now work out my inflation for 2009, so I take my 5 Rand, let's change colors, I take my 5 Rand 28 and I work it out as 107.6%. Am I going to get an amount that's bigger or smaller? I'm going to get one that's higher. So let's just check that out. I've got 5.28 times by 107.6%, and I see that it's 5 Rand 68. So what I'm going to be paying now is 5 Rand 68. So even though my inflation went down, because it is a positive number, my cost of things increases. It doesn't increase by as much, but as long as inflation is positive, we carry on paying more and more money. So it says, does this mean things are cheaper in 2009? Definitely not. So it is a definite no. Things are still more expensive. They are 7.6% more expensive. So the only time things would go down is actually if you had a negative inflation. And when we're looking at month to month, sometimes we do get a negative. So be careful of this. And the way they like to ask this question as well is they like to show it to you in a graph. So they would kind of give you a graph of inflation, and where the inflation was going up 5, 6, then it went up to 11 and then down again. That was still positive. So just remember, whenever you have a positive value of inflation, it is going up. Things are getting more expensive. So I hope that helps to understand inflation. And now I'm just going to kind of wrap up what have we done today. So we've had our life lessons. We've learned about banking. So it's important for you to carefully choose your bank account and check that you're actually getting the best deal. And we saw that from Sipo's accounts and all his transactions that he did. And we also learned that it's important to save. And then we learned about interest. So when we're saving, we want to use compound interest because we want our interest to grow on our interest. When we borrow money, we want to be able to pay back with simple interest. So we learned about interest. And finally, we learned about the buying power of money and how things are going astronomically expensive, but we're dealing with an average of what average increases. Most important things, guys, is be able to use your calculator. Read the question and reread the question so that you know that you're actually answering what they want, and kind of like when in doubt, give them a little bit more. Don't forget your units, especially dealing with money. We've got 2 decimal places, so it's not 3.5 Rand, but it's 3 Rand 50. So units, money, and I think I've now given you everything. So just practice, 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 and I hope that this show has actually helped you, and I guess I'll see you again soon. So goodbye.